The Tau Empire has been a faction that's been sitting forgotten and ignominious at the bottom of competitive Warhammer 40k since the release of 9th edition, but that age may be over as Tau take a convincing 4th place in the Atlantic City Open. Let's talk about Richard Siegler's Tau list that almost made it all the way. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're talking some Tau, and Tau from the Atlantic City Open, run by Richard Siegler, who piloted a Farsight Enclaves list to a 7-1 finish during the event. Super impressive. What we're going to be doing today is going over Richard's list in detail, and we're going to be talking about the matchups that he faced to try to glean the strategies that were implemented here to take Tau to such a strong finish. Now, I will preface this before we get into the video that unlike some of the other competitive coverage videos that I've done in the past, I am not actually a particularly experienced Tau player, and while I do know a lot of that about the faction from playing against them and from commentating Tau Empire games, I may not have the same level of insight that a Tau player might. So please bear that in mind as we go through the results of this event. As always, if you enjoy this style of content and you like hearing me talk about competitive 40k stuff, especially Tau stuff, go ahead and let me know down in the comments below. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. I really appreciate it. It helps support the channel, and it helps me know what kind of videos people like to hear me talk about and stuff. I don't know. Let's talk about some Tau. So first off, talking about Richard Siegler's Farsight Enclaves list. This is a relatively standard Farsight Enclaves list, bringing an XV8 Crisis Bodyguard Death Star that we've seen a lot in the past. At the end of 8th edition, this was a particular favorite style of list. The alternative to Triple Riptide, as that slowly got phased out of the metagame and this style of list came back in, but with some 9th edition flair. So this is a single battalion detachment coming out of Farsight Enclaves, as we said before. It is bringing Commander Farsight. Now, Farsight obviously supports the list by giving you a second activation of Montka, even if you've already declared a Kalyan earlier in the turn. Now, I don't know if ACO was using the FAQ that allowed Montka to allow Tau units to counters remain stationary and therefore fall back and shoot. If that is the case, giving a Tau army 2 activations of the potential fall back and shoot, or the ability to trigger a Montka after you've already taken advantage of the additional damage caused by Kalyan, are both incredibly powerful benefits to have. In addition to that, Farsight is also giving everything within 6 inches of an aura of reroll ones to hit in the fight phase. Not a huge deal, but if you combo it with a number of high strength attacks made by a Crisis Bodyguard team, it can be pretty effective if they do get engaged in melee. You also have access to the Sworn Bodyguard stratagem for that team, as long as they are within 3 inches of Farsight or any other friendly Sept character, giving them full rerolls in the fight phase as well, meaning that this Death Star operates together relatively efficiently and can put out some hurt if they are engaged before, again, using that second Montka to pull back and fire without any penalty. We also have a standard Cold Star Commander with 3 missile pods, 3 Unity Devastation, and a Marker Light Drone to add some Savior protocols to the army. Bringing up the troops allotment, we have 5 Breacher teams, 4 of them bringing additional Marker Drones. We have an XB-104 Riptide. This is bringing the Ion Accelerator as well as the upgraded prototype weapon system, the Amplified Ion Accelerator. This is a pretty impressive profile because it doesn't require the Riptide to overcharge its weapon system to get the full effectiveness from its weapon, and that allows it to use some of the other abilities that the Riptide has thanks to its Nova Reactor. Not only is this weapon superlatively powerful by itself, dealing D3 plus 3 damage on a converted wound roll, but you're also then free to use its boost to move 2d6 inches in the charge phase to pull back behind obscuring terrain and keep it safe. This is the benefit of taking a single Riptide battlesuit, and is definitely the archetype of list that we've been seeing Tau move toward, where in the past you would run 3 Riptides and overcharge all of their weapons every turn using that branched Nova charge to get some additional survivability on the foremost Riptide that was going to be in danger. Having a single Riptide allows you to concentrate your resources on it a little bit more efficiently. We also then have the XV8 Crisis Bodyguard team. This is the central focal point of the list that you're going to be dumping a lot of your resources into. Now, the Bodyguard unit has been upgraded with the Veteran Cadre ability to give it +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, bringing it down to a 3+ ballistic skill, 4+ weapon skill, which again will combo with that reroll 1's aura, at least in the fight phase, that Commander Farsight has, and just make them a lot more consistent in the shooting phase in general. We have 1 model with an airbursting fragmentation projector, a shield generator, and an XV802 Crisis Iridium battlesuit to give them a 2+ armor save. That 2+ armor save combos with the reactive countermeasures ability to allow the unit to ignore armor penetration values of 1 or 2. There is an outstanding question with this ability whether it applies to the unit or the model itself. The prototype weapon system rule specifies that it applies to an entire unit, but the reactive countermeasures prototype specifically is only usable on a battlesuit model with an airbursting fragmentation projector. That said, with a shield generator and a 2+ armor save ignoring AP 1 and 2, you can pretty safely allocate all of your wounds to the model with the airbursting fragmentation projector to make use of that reactive countermeasures, however it gets ruled at the event you're at. And that model is going to be ridiculously difficult to kill, and even though this list doesn't have a vast swath of drones to save your protocol's wounds to, it does make the unit significantly more difficult to remove. We also have 2 additional Crisis Bodyguards with ATS, Advanced Targeting Systems, for +1 AP, 2 sets of missile pods, as well as also upgraded with Iridium battlesuits for some additional resilience, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional Crisis Bodyguards, all with ATS, all with missile pods, to be shooting out an immense number of Strength 7 AP 2 D3 damage weapons, a very good broad-ranging profile that has the shot volume to kill light or medium infantry, or deal damage to heavier vehicles if you need to, especially with the application of the command and control node stratagem, allowing a commander to give up their shooting for a turn. So we can easily see Commander Farsight not shooting just his 1 plasma rifle for the turn, to spend 1 CP and give that entire battlesuit unit full rerolls to wound in the shooting phase. If you're able to get enough marker lights on something from all those marker drones, you could improve their hit rolls to hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s with full rerolls to wound, and they convert almost 100% of those missile pod attacks for an immense amount of damage. Rounding out the rest of the list, we have a lot of objective scorers, utility units, just various units that are going to be grabbing secondary objectives. We have a Pathfinder team. Obviously, this comes with the Vanguard rule, allowing them to move at the start of the game after deployment. That gives the list a little bit of protection against an Alpha Strike or pre-game movement heavy list. And there are also a lot of missions where being able to move before the game helps out a ton. That Pathfinder teams also come equipped with a Grav Inhibitor drone to reduce enemy charges within 12 inches by D3. That's going to make these battlesuits a little bit harder to engage into, especially if that Pathfinder team is able to set up in a relatively centrally located area to project that anti-grav aura. We also have a unit of 4 Vespid Stingwings, obviously an excellent unit to pop in and complete secondary objectives like deploy scramblers. It is important to mention that Atlantic City Open is using the GT 2020 packet, so we are still in deploy scramblers territory. We haven't yet upgraded to retrieve Octaria's data. So in this case, this unit's entire role in life is going to be to complete that deploy scramblers, potentially score engage on all fronts. Speaking of engage on all fronts, we also have 2 Remora stealth drones. These are phenomenal, not only for blocking off awkward positions on the table, just where your opponent would try to stand their models after a charge, but obviously can't end movements overlapping the Remora's base. So while they are aircraft and can be moved through freely by even non-flyers, you can't stand on top, and that can make your formation difficult to engage into if you have Remoras in awkward positions. Not to mention the fact that Remoras are relatively maneuverable for aircraft. They don't have the supersonic rule like a lot of aircraft do, forcing them to move in direct lines and pivot to move around the table. They just have to end a minimum of 20 inches from where they started every turn, and otherwise can move totally freely, which allows them to strafe around their side of the table really easily, or again, run up and grab those secondary objectives if you need to. Last, but certainly not least, we're going to be riding in style with those breacher teams to the battlefield with 2 TY7 Devilfishies, both with 2 sets of gun drones attached to them. Obviously, that allows this list to play the dedicated transport style of objective holding, just like a lot of Eldar lists and other similar factions are relying on right now, but this list is able to do that a little bit more effectively, given that not only is that Devilfish probably going to be holding 2 breacher teams, putting 2 separate objective secured units on an objective, but it also allows you to disembark the 2 gun drones. So even if you shoot the Devilfish off of an objective to stop the Tau player from scoring it, the army can then put 2 objective secured units and a separate unit on that objective from the disembark, which means that if you're not engaging into those units in melee, and again, this army is going to make that as difficult to do as possible, then it's going to be very difficult for you to remove all 4 of those units from an objective to actually stop the Tau player from scoring. So that's the list. It's cool to see such a classic list come back, and I think one of the most interesting things about this style of list is that I don't know if you could have designed a more Farsight Enclaves list. If we asked a GW employee to build the quintessential Farsight Enclave style of list and to put it on the table and photograph it in a narrative setting, I think it might just be this one. We have a couple tanks, we have a ton of Crisis battle suits, we have the one Riptide looming over everything, in addition to all the drones and all the infantry following things up and supporting those battle suits, and this is exactly what I think Games Workshop wants a Tau list to look like. So it's really cool that the cutting edge of competitive Tau actually meshes with the fluff so effectively. It's pretty clear as well that this list is pretty effective. Siegler able to pilot it to a 7-1 finish at ACO. But one thing I'd like to mention is that obviously ACO was using the pre-nerf Drukhari rules. Their list lock had occurred before the Drukhari nerf came out a couple weeks ago during the May FAQ. So they were using full strength Drukhari. And as a result, the meta was somewhere around 15% Drukhari players. And we saw a lot of very strong Drukhari finishes with the first and second place in the tournament coming out as Drukhari. That said, Tau is actually a pretty crafty pick for a Drukhari-centric meta, because Tau tends to be very good into Drukhari. The missile pod weapon profile is almost perfect at attacking almost everything in a Drukhari army. It wounds raiders on 3s. It's not paying for a high AP value, so it's not really worried about only using one of their AP to put it on its invulnerable save, and it's high enough volume to get through that invulnerable save and punch through with those D3 damage. You usually only need maybe 4 conversions onto a raider to kill it, not to mention the fact that it's also good at killing all of the infantry that are going to pop out of a raider as soon as it's dead. On top of that, just random Tau stuff is good at killing Drukhari profiles, a lot of toughness 3 infantry with bad saves against ranged attack. In the games that I've witnessed, I've seen Drukhari being torn apart left and right by Tau, and while they do have an uphill battle into most of the other armies in the meta, if you are expecting to play against Eldari game after game, Tau may be one of the best options for you. Tau certainly weren't my first pick for the hero that we needed to fight against Drukhari, but I think it is pretty cool that they do have a place in this new Drukhari metagame. Next up, let's talk about the opponents that Richard Siegler played during the event. Round 1, he played against Rob Triplets Space Wolves. Rob was running a pretty standard Dreadnought-heavy Space Wolf list, bringing 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, 2 Relic Contemptors, a bunch of units of Jump Pack Infantry, including 2 Wolf Guard, Vanguard Veteran-style units, as well as 2 units of Skyclaws, a Sakaran Arcus to add some indirect fire, and rounding it out with a Phobos Librarian, a Primaris Tech Marine to buff those Dreadnoughts up, and a Frost Lightning Claw Chapter Master. This style of Space Wolf army tends to try to draw its opponent into profitable engagements for the Space Wolves player, using the power of those Redemptor and Relic Contemptor Dreadnoughts to force your opponent to engage into them. The downside is that the list gets outranged relatively quickly, and I can definitely see the low volume of shooting from those Redemptor Dreadnoughts being able to bounce off of Savior Protocols or shield generators on the battle suits, whereas the Relic Contemptors will probably have a hard time getting through the 2+ armor save in that Crisis Bodyguard unit. And if you're not engaging into a Space Wolves army, a lot of their tricks, their universal heroic interventions and their ability to make you fight last aren't working quite so well. There is some counterattack in the Phobos Librarian, bringing some Tempestos Discipline psychic powers to give him access to the -1 to hit aura if he ever gets any one of those off, which can be pretty effective, but relying on basically just 4 units of Assault Marine equivalents to move up the table and be your front line alongside some Incursor squads means that all the Tau player needs to do is wipe those away, and they can basically control the board from there. It is a powerful version of Space Wolves, but I'm not super shocked that it went down to superior firepower. Round 2, we see the anti-Drukhari tech already getting paid off as Richard was paired up against Joseph Martin's Drukhari. Joseph bringing a pretty standard loadout of Drukhari, bringing a smattering of witches alongside some Cabal of the Black Heart Cabal units, including a unit of Cabalite Trueborn, as well as a bunch of Raiders for the rerolls on those delicious, delicious Darklands shots. We also saw, interestingly, Lilith Hexperax in a Cult of Strife detachment, bringing a bunch more witches, as well as 2 Incubi to round the unit out. Those are units that have a really tough time getting in to strong Overwatch. You can use the stratagem to deny Overwatch, but that's only on a single unit, and all the Tau player needs to do is hold his For the Greater Good Overwatches to then be able to use them on the units that are going to be coming in without that ignore Overwatch benefit. If the Raiders are going down and the Witches and Incubi have to pull things out themselves, as long as the Tau player doesn't give them the ability to multi-charge several units and shut off all of their Overwatch and potentially lock them in with no escape, that Overwatch is going to be pretty brutal, and those battlesuits are going to be able to continue to peel out Eldari units as the game goes on. Moving into round 3, Richard was able to take out William Pogonis with his Dark Angels. This is a Raven Wing style of Dark Angels list, and I think a really interesting pivot that Dark Angels players have been moving into lately, as we're seeing the win rate of Deathwing Terminator-centric builds drop pretty precipitously as people understand how to play against them and mortal wounds become more common in the metagame. Dark Angels players have been moving towards this faster attack bike-centric list. The upside of this list is that it is excellent at scoring secondary objectives and can move an incredible distance every turn. The downside is that you do lose a lot of hitting power in exchange for that mobility. We do see a lot of Melta-Guns and Multi-Meltas in this list, bringing 2 standard bike squads in the first Outrider detachment, both of which with two Melta-Guns, as well as 2 land speeders with multi-Meltas, and 3 attack bike squads, as well as a 3rd bike squad, bringing another attack bike with multi-Meltas, as well as 2 Melta-Guns in that bike squad, all of the attack bikes with multi-Meltas as well. So just a ridiculous number of Melta profiles. Unfortunately, Melta weapons are not really what you need to fight against Tau. The invulnerable saves and the savior protocols are just going to shut you right down, and that's very difficult to fight through, especially when you have profiles that aren't particularly good at surviving Strength 7 AP2 weapons with multi-damage. So I do like the pivot into Ravenwing. I definitely think that the Ravenwing style of lists are more effective than the Deathwing lists that we saw that people were freaking out about when Dark Angels were released. But I'm not shocked at all that this over-reliance on Melta weapons to deal damage went down to a faction that's particularly survivable against single-target, high-damage weaponry. Round 4, we saw Richard pull out a relatively close 11-point win against Anthony Vanella. This was, wait for it, again, a Drukhari list, very similar to the previous list we talked about. This one focusing a little bit more on the racks with liquefier guns, which I imagine was relatively difficult for Richard to deal with. I was able to put out an immense amount of pretty high efficiency firepower that's really good at killing those battlesuits, but that does put a huge target on the Raiders carrying those racks, and if Richard's able to take them down before they're able to perform their movement shenanigans, get in range, and start beating that XV8 squad to death with those +1 to wound 2 flat damage liquefier guns, then it becomes very difficult for the Drukhari to engage profitably into the Tau army. That said, Anthony's list did bring a unit of Reavers as well as a unit of Hellions, both of which are very fast and can potentially multi-engage several units in the Tau army. So I think if there was a style of Drukhari that was going to be good into Richard's list, but again, I think this is generally a Tau-favored matchup, and if you do get a little bit lucky there and are able to pull down the Raiders and their occupants early before they're able to disembark all over your face, then it can go pretty well for you. Now, round 5, we had a little bit of a tragedy because Richard was actually paired into the Tau mirror match. That's right, this Drukhari-centric metagame actually got 2 players to 5-0 at ACO using pure Tau. This list was a mixed sept list. We had 1 Viora patrol detachment bringing several 10-man breacher teams, as well as a couple XV25 stealth battlesuits and Devilfish to hold those breachers, as well as a Farsight Enclaves list bringing a Riptide battlesuit, as well as several XV8 Crisis battlesuits, and a Yavara on top of that, alongside those Remora stealth drones to grab secondary objectives. I imagine that the heavier armor on Richard's side of the table, and especially that reactive countermeasures upgrade on the big broadside battlesuit team, was particularly punishing to the other Tau player in this matchup. Tau often have a lot of emphasis on AP1 and AP2 weaponry, especially from their infantry and lighter battlesuits. Now, we don't see that quite as much in this list. We do see all those breacher teams who do get up to AP2, but the Crisis battlesuits themselves are bringing air-bursting fragmentation projectors, I imagine, as another way to deal with Drukhari, since after that XV104 Riptide blows up a Raider or a similar dedicated transport with that amplified ion accelerator, and those models emergency disembark to behind a piece of line-of-sight blocking terrain, the air-bursting fragmentation projectors can then kill whatever is inside that transport. You also have the Remora stealth drones that are very maneuverable and can get lines of sight to those areas, so there's a lot of ways in this list. That said, having a big, super resilient brick of battlesuit bodyguards in the center of the table that this list is going to have a really hard time dealing with was probably the clincher in this matchup. And those models coming back with a high volume of shooting, so your invulnerable saves and your savior protocols aren't going to be able to block things efficiently, makes it very difficult for battlesuits to survive, especially once that command and control node stratagem gets implemented. It does make sense to me that Richard's list would be much more effective in the mirror match. Moving on to round 6, the final round before the cut to top 8. And I think we're sensing a theme here. This is against Jonas Beardsley's Drukhari again, so we're really doing it. Yet again, relatively similar build of Drukhari, mixing some Kabalite units out of Cabal of the Black Heart, alongside those Ravers with reroll hits on those Darklance shots, with some Cult of Strife, Witch Covens, and 2 units of Rax out of a Dark Technomancer's detachment. So not as much of an emphasis on the Liquefier gun combo, but again, a very similar build to the last Drukhari army that we saw. This one even also including those Reavers, which can potentially get up and multi-engage a lot of stuff to make that Overwatch even more difficult. Richard was able to pull through that win with a convincing 20-point lead, 88 points to 68, and move on to round 7, where he was paired against Sean Naden playing... You guessed it, it's Drukhari again. I mean, what a shocker at this point. Although Sean Naden's style of Drukhari is a lot different than most other players. He brings mixed Eldari lists rather than pure Drukhari, bringing in an Expert Crafter's Master for Shots Spearhead detachment out of Craft Worlds in order to add a backbone of shooting to the Drukhari front line that they can present. This was bringing 2 units of Dark Reapers, as well as 3 Shadow Weaver support weapon platforms, as well as a Night Spinner and a Falcon. Those Shadow Weavers are going to be really good, again, in the mirror match, bringing a lot of Strength 6 indirect fire weaponry that's good at shooting Raiders and putting damage on them, but also can kill everything inside those Raiders as soon as they get blown up by those Dark Reapers. We also have 2 Succubi in a battalion detachment coming out of a Dark Technomancer's build, bringing 3 Grotesques with Liquefier guns to sit inside a Raider, as well as a couple Chronos, and, interestingly, a bunch of Scourges with Dark Lances and Shredders that can pop out of Deep Strike. I imagine this was a tougher style of list for the Tau to get through. While those support weapon platforms and the indirect fire don't do too much damage to 2+ armor save battlesuits or tanks, the ability for the Dark Reapers to sit relatively far back and use Fire and Fade to pop in and out of line of sight or embark inside that Falcon to be relatively safe, I'm sure was good. Although one of those units is going to have to commit and then probably get killed by missile pods. So it's not a perfect answer for those guys to sit in the back and continue to shoot, but Richard's ability clearly to kill the Raiders and destroy the Grotesques and Rax inside to be able to stop that Drukhari front line was able to secure him another very convincing 18-point win. That brought him to the semifinals of the event, where Siegler was matched up with his Art of War team member. This is Nick Nanavati, and this is where, unfortunately, the streak of incredible luck that we saw with this Tau army, getting through all of these Drukhari armies, finally ran out. As we've seen many times before, we talked previously about Mark Hurdle's Adeptus Mechanicus going through several Drukhari armies in a row at Dallas GT, almost taking the event down, but eventually dropping towards the end of the event to Drukhari. This is basically the same story, because in the semifinals, Nick was able to take the win against Siegler 78-63, a 15-point win for Nick Nanavati, who ended up going down in the finals to Brad Chester, putting Drukhari as the number 1 and number 2 spots in the event. But we were only 15 points off from having Tau in the finals, and that would have been so hype. Nick's list again was bringing a very similar style. We saw a Cabal of the Blackheart detachment bringing a Court of the Archon, a unit that I don't think sees enough play, or didn't see enough play, given that they're hyper efficient for 136 points. You get 18 wounds with a 5+ damage ignore roll, bringing Sliths and Urguls, 2 units of Incubi, 5 Raiders, 1 with a Phantasm Grenade Launcher to mount Liquefiers in and give them the ability to fire and fade up the table to extend the range of your Liquefiers. We also see a Cult of Strife detachment bringing a Succubus, 3 units of Witches, 2 of 5, and 1 of 10, with Morvaine's Agonizer to prevent falling back, as well as a Dark Technomancer's Homunculus Coven's detachment with a Homunculus, 3 units of Rax with Liquefier guns, as well as several Chronos to add some recursion to the list and a little bit of a meaty backbone. Interestingly, we didn't see any Drazhar in this version. I think there there was a very last-minute change to Drazhar in the ACO specific rules. If I remember correctly, they ruled that if Drazhar was your warlord, you would not be able to get access to a lot of the Cult of Strife specific technology, which saw some Drazhars being removed from lists last minute, but that's something I don't know 100%, not having access to that correspondence and not actually playing in the event. But it definitely goes to show you that taking Tau in as a relatively smart meta pick, definitely not one that people were going to be highly prepared against, and an army that can play exceptionally well against the top meta army that Richard ended up playing 4 times over the course of the event, was totally the right call, brought Richard to a 7-1 placement, 4th place in the entire event out of 254 players. An incredible showing for one of the lowest ranked factions in Warhammer 40k, and definitely goes to show you that if you have that smart meta sense, you can succeed playing off-meta stuff. Now, obviously, I will say that Richard is an incredibly storied player. He has a lot of event wins under his belt, and a lot of very impressive wins, especially with Tau. So if anybody was going to bring them to a large event and do well with them, it was going to be him. And it does require sort of a perfect storm of matchups and metagame for a meta pick like that to work. If you go to your random RTT and say, I think Drukhari's good right now, so obviously I'm going to win all my games with Tau, that obviously doesn't end up happening too much. If you spec a list specifically for another matchup, you do actually have to get that matchup. And while as you go up the ranks in this event, your chance to hit Drukhari was much higher, as Drukhari had a very high conversion rate going into the later games, you're still not guaranteed to hit that, and there is a potential that you hit an incredibly bad matchup, you go second, you hit a bad mission, and those all can tank your tournament run very quickly. That said, 7-1 is an incredible record, and doing so with Tau is incredibly cool. I know people are super excited to see Tau doing well, and we are excited to see some off-meta picks. So I was really excited to go over this list and its matchups. Now, we also saw Dark Angels do incredibly well in the top 8 of the event. Thomas Ogden and Charlie Andre both taking Dark Angels to a top 8 placing. Thomas Ogden actually taking 3rd place. We saw these Raven Wing style lists that we talked about previously doing excellently, spamming a ton of attack bikes, a ton of bike squads, as well as Outriders, even some land speeders seeing some play as well. So super happy that the Dark Angels community was able to make that pivot into a faster style of list that I was so convinced from the beginning was where the army was supposed to be, and these Terminator spam lists were just too slow to compete. And that's what we saw very quickly. We saw Dark Angels drop to around a 35% win rate very quickly after the release of their codex, but they are creeping back up now that players are going to be taking these more flexible options. That said, Drukhari was definitely still the overall winners of the event. They had 4 placings in the top 8 between Sean Naden's mixed Eldari list, Anthony Vanella's pure Drukhari at 7th place, as well as Nick Nadavati in 2nd place, who lost out to Brad Chester, the overall winner. Big shout out to Sasha Edelkraut as well, bringing Black Templars in. I think Black Templars, an army that everyone likes to call a sleeper in 9th edition, but one that has a ton of combat tricks and a ton of really powerful abilities. That said, it is not easy to pilot Space Marines to a high record, especially in the pre-Drukhari nerf metagame, when liquefiers are almost the perfect weapon to kill almost every Space Marine profile. This list was focused very heavily on Vanguard veterans. It had a big unit of 10 Vanguard veterans in it. And while Black Templars with the Litany of Divine Protection have some very good defensive technology for those Vanguard veterans, liquefier guns are so toxic to that style of unit that it is so impressive that Sasha was able to take that list to a 6-1 record, coming in at that 8th place. So congratulations to all those top 8 players. Also, congratulations to everyone who went to the event. Hope everyone had a good time over there. We had a ton of people from the Tactical Tortoise community playing in it. We had a whole thread opened up where people were sharing their thoughts on the event and their games as it was going through. So it was really a fun community experience for everyone to get together and talk about ACO. But anyway, thanks everyone for watching all the way to the end of the video. I want to drop a big thanks to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, also YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All those people are phenomenal. They help support me making these videos, talking about some weird and wacky lists. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming, and pledge your allegiance to the Tau Empire.